Hello and a very warm welcome to Build Back Better for Carers. My name is James Townsend. I'm CEO of Mobilise. We are a startup by carers and for carers. We're working with carer supporting organisations and local authorities around the country to boost capacity for supporting carers at what is a really difficult time. A very warm welcome today because we're having another of our conversations about how we can build back from the COVID pandemic to make sure that carers have the support they need to really thrive in their caring role. And I'm really pleased that today we have with us Shubhanna, who is Partnership Development Officer for the Carers Coalition of Scotland. We're going to be talking today. Please do bring your comments, your questions in. We'd always love to have a conversation going on. But first up, Shubhanna, welcome.
Thank you. Hi, James. Good to be on the programme. Thank you. Whatever this is.
Whatever it is, we don't really understand all the time, but it's wonderful to have you with us. And so I've just mentioned a bit about your role on the Carers Coalition for Scotland. Can you tell us what that is and what you do, please?
If I can. So I'm the Partnership Development Officer at the Coalition of Carers in Scotland. So the Coalition of Carers is one of the national carer organisations in Scotland. And I guess the easiest way to describe what we do as an organisation is we're almost like the conduit between national policy and sort of local practice. So what we do is we make sense of national policy, national guidance and national sort of legislation. We try and explain that and disseminate that to local carer organisations and also to carers across Scotland. And similarly, we work quite closely with local carer organisations and hear directly from our members, many of whom are carers themselves, and feedback a lot of the issues, a lot of the concerns back up to national policymakers as well. So I guess that's sort of our role. We don't, and I think people assume that because we're a national care organisation that we have a lot of face-to-face with carers, and that's not necessarily true, if that makes sense. I mean, I don't support carers on a one-to-one basis as such. A lot of the work that I do is very much around keeping carers informed of their rights and of national legislation, guidance, etc. But also, as I said, making national policymakers aware of what's going on the ground as well.
And although you're not directly supporting carers as individuals, you are really plugged into what things are like for carers at the moment because you have some caring experience yourself, like so many people we've had on the live streams. Can you tell us a little bit about what it's been like to be caring and working for you over the past year?
Well, I guess over the past year, it's and I guess we're all saying this, aren't we? It has been exhausting. It's been non-stop. It's and I think, as you said, James, having a caring role and also working for a national care organisation in the pandemic, particularly, a lot of those boundaries have become blurred in terms of what I do in my working life, but also what I do in my own personal and family life as well. And you're quite right in the sense that I do feel perhaps a bit better. I have a better understanding perhaps than some of my other colleagues around the impact that the pandemic has had for carers, because I'm not just writing about it, I'm living it. You know, having a disabled child and a husband who has a long-term health condition and is a wheelchair user as well, gives you a very different perspective and a sort of greater insight into what a lot of carers are experiencing at the moment, a lot of families are experiencing at the moment. You know, so it's not just work for me. It literally is my life.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm sure that drives so much of the passion that comes through in your social media presence. We follow each other on Twitter, and it's always really valuable to to see what you're saying and bring that out from your own experience. There's your Twitter handle there if anybody would like to follow. So I suppose one of the really interesting things that you're looking at the moment, particularly in Scotland, so that we've got elections coming up in May across the UK, local elections and regional elections. Particularly for you in Scotland, you've got the Scottish parliamentary elections coming up. What are the big issues that are being discussed for carers in that election campaign at the moment?
So, so I think we probably just need to make a distinction in terms of what's being discussed and what should be being discussed. At the moment, I would say the things that are being discussed, that in terms of carer support, it's been slightly, I would say, slightly overshadowed by some ways, and in a good way, but also it slightly hinders it as well. Is the whole independent review of adult social care that happened just a few months back there. Quite a few of the pledges in the manifestos at the moment of the main political parties have focused on the recommendations from that review, and that's great because most of those recommendations, the majority of those recommendations, are very much welcomed by a lot of carers and a lot of people with support needs. However, what carers want is more than just what's in that report, because you have to remember that report is very much about, and it's very specific about the recommendations for social care, but our lives are more than just social care. We need support in all aspects of our lives. So in terms of what carers want, we want the recommendations of the Feely reviews, and the majority of those implemented. That would be great, thank you very much. But we also want a better understanding of our economic well-being, and again, the way in which a lot of the parties have addressed that is that they have focused on carers allowance and how they are going to perhaps increase it slightly, to meet the sort of needs of carers. And we need to understand, and I think most of us who are carers understand that is certainly not enough, and it's it needs to go much more and far sort of beyond than just increasing the level of carers allowance. And I've made this point on a number of other occasions as well. Carers allowance, as we know, only around 10% of the carer population are actually even eligible for carers allowance. What about the other 90%, who are struggling financially and in other ways as well? How can we better support them? We need policies, we need pledges which go beyond carers allowance and social care. We need to also be looking at how do we address the health and well-being of carers. How do we ensure that the health and well-being is a priority for health and social care partnerships across Scotland, because it certainly doesn't feel like that at the moment. Practical things like being able to have annual health checks for people who are unpaid carers, because as we know, when you are caring for somebody, and as cliche as it may sound, and it's not even a cliche because I know it happens for so many people, we put our needs way down that list of priorities. Our first priority tends to be, is the person that I'm caring for, are their needs being met? Are their healthcare needs being met? Are their emotional needs being met? And somewhere along that, you kind of forget to look after yourself. And although that might not seem like a huge thing, over time, that can be really detrimental, both for your physical health, but also your emotional or mental well-being. And there needs to be somebody that steps in. There needs to be a service which prioritises carers and say, do you know what, we see you, we know what you're doing is a lot, and we want you to be a priority. And something as simple as literally just calling us in once a year to give us a once over. Because we're not going to go in otherwise, and it means, on a more serious note, it also means that a lot of carers are missing out and not going and not attending like screening appointments, and not perhaps addressing issues which could be dealt at a much earlier stage because of the time issues, because of replacement care. There'll be 101 reasons and excuses that will come up, reasons for why you can't make it to your appointment, and we need to do something about that, and I think that's
And Shubhanna, I'm really interested that there's that difference between the conversation that you feel we should be having in the middle of an election campaign and the conversation that is happening. What can carers be doing to make sure that their voice is heard in the political rough and tumble of an election campaign?
I think, well, one of the things that we've tried to do as a national care organisation, along with our other national care organisations in Scotland, is we've put together a manifesto. It's a manifesto for unpaid carers and young carers. It's um, a wee booklet. It's a short document, and it summarises all the key asks that carers have told us about over the last year and beyond, but particularly, I suppose, over the pandemic as well. And we've put them all in this manifesto so that when you are, I don't know if any of us are speaking to our candidates at the moment face to face, but certainly if you're interacting with them on social media or virtually, to be able to ask, well, what are you as a candidate, or what are you as a political party doing to address these sort of key asks? And again, just to summarise, those are around social care, around health and well-being, around employment for carers, and sort of financial well-being. So, what is it? So we've done some of that work to to enable carers to ask those questions, but sometimes that's the hard job, is being able to have those conversations with your candidates. I think particularly in the climate right now, where we aren't able to physically see and meet our candidates, so everything's kind of being done via email or online or through social media at the moment. So I don't know how that's going to play out in terms of being able to influence. It can be quite frustrating, and I think you also have to remember, I mean, although some of us are active on social media, there's a majority of unpaid carers who are not. So how are they being able to get across their points of view, and being able to speak to the candidates at the moment as well? So
it's a real question, and in many instances, we've seen that the shift to online provision has enabled people to get involved in council decisions and access them online. And the future of that is up for grabs. So whether or not that will be continuing is an interesting question, and so we've looked at the nitty-gritty of the kind of the detailed policy coming up for the election campaign. I want to ask you to take a kind of a slightly broader view now, and ask you, well, in the long distance future, in 10 years' time, can you paint us a picture of what your vision for carer support can look like if you were really, and I know you like the word radical, in your ambition for that? What could it look like in 10 years' time?
Gosh, it could if anything, it would be an improvement to where we are right now, regardless of whether it's radical or not, I guess. But in terms of in another decade, and I think I was saying to you this before, James. I mean, I've been doing this in terms of being a carer. I've been doing this for about a decade, and it's been a slog. But I have personally seen some differences in the last decade, and I'd like to think that we can continue seeing some improvements, but we need a huge shift in in the pace at which change is happening, if that makes sense. I might be in the minority here, but I am probably one of the few people that feels quite hopeful that we can do it. But I think it requires a lot of it requires people to do, as I said, to do a bit of pushing. But we kind of need to keep at it, if that makes sense. We can't be complacent. But at the same time, I realise that it kind of almost puts some of the pressure and onus on carers to do some of that heavy lifting at the moment, and and that shouldn't be what's happening. But it's almost like we kind of have to do some of that work right now. But I am hopeful.
And what is it that drives that hope for you? Because a lot of people are frustrated by
I
the
know.
pace of change and the systems in place. So what keeps that flame of hope alive for you?
I think because I have seen a change, and I'd like to think that that has happened for more than just me personally. And if I think about it, I suppose reflecting on what's changed and why it's changed. Um, I mean, I'm a different person now than I was 10 years ago, and in the sense that I am much more clued up about my rights. So I think that is quite an important aspect of it. I think there's a huge piece of work to be done in Scotland, but obviously across the UK as well, around people actually understanding their rights, understanding them in a way which makes sense. So this isn't just about regurgitating what the legislation says. It's about making, as one of my friends says, making rights real. They need to see what that actually means on a practical level. And I think there's a huge piece of work to be done around that. And I think in Scotland, it's a particularly sort of exciting time because we are on the verge of being able to introduce some of the human rights legislation into Scots law. So that in itself is quite an exciting time. So in 10 years' time, I'm hoping that that is included in our legislation, and we are as a nation far more in tune about what our rights are, about asking for our rights, about having our rights realised, that it just becomes second nature. And I know within the Independent Review of Adult Social Care, there's a huge focus on there as well around, about social care being, based on using a human rights based approach. So, where the people in power are beginning to use the right language, which is a good thing, but we need more than just that. We need more than just the sort of rhetoric and the talk. We need,
And
we need the action as well.
yeah, so the action's a big part of it. And you mentioned the independent review on social care a moment ago. One of the things that I was really excited by a few weeks ago was your article talking about viewing support for carers and social care as an investment rather than a burden. Can you say a little bit more about your vision for that?
Yeah, so there's a lot about there's a lot in that review, and one of the essential things it talks about is a change in the narrative. We have for too long seen money spent in social care as well, we've certainly not seen it as an investment, that's for sure. And I think it's about changing that mindset, and that's going to require a lot of things. There's a lot in the review around hearing people's voices and using and people's voices actually influencing what the future of social care could and should look like. And I know Derek Feely, who sort of headed up the review, summarised it in an interview recently about the sort of, for him, the four key asks of people from that review, and the four key things that I suppose we should focus on to change the narrative were around, firstly, he talked about carers and people with support needs saying that they needed to, one, hear my voice, and secondly, honour my rights, thirdly, ease my way, and fourthly was see me as a solution. And he was saying, and I would absolutely agree with his sort of analysis of this, is basically we do those four things, we're on our way to changing that narrative, changing that narrative around social care, about seeing social care as an investment and not as a burden, and being able to ensure that so those four things basically are around, for example, carers being included as equal experts, not just as participants in conversations or in discussions, but actually as people with equal power around those discussion tables.
More than just a taxi driver.
Yeah, and that's a huge shift. I mean, if we can do that right, then I would say, we're on our way to being able to make some of that change. And I said I'm probably in the minority, but I do feel hopeful that can happen. And if people shoot me down and say, you're living in some airy fairyland, so be it. But I will continue to sit in my airy fairyland and continue to be hopeful, because the alternative is just too dire to contemplate, James. Do you know?
Absolutely. Well, Shubhanna, thank you for sharing your view there. So keeping the hope alive, that we can make change, being confident about that. You've reminded us of the power of individual carers engaging with candidates and getting stuck into that political debate to make sure that our rights and our voice are heard. And you've also talked about the importance of vision and culture change that puts carers and sees social care as an investment, not a burden, and actually seeing carers as an equal partner in all of that conversation. Shubhanna, thank you so much for sharing some time and your views with us. We're here every Thursday at 6 o'clock. Please do join us for the continuing series of Building Back Better for Carers. Thanks to everybody who's joined us today, and please do continue to keep your comments and questions coming in just down there in the comments section. We always love to have a good conversation. Shubhanna, thank you very much.
Thank you, James.